Okay, you got me? Hello?
Hello,
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing very well.
I don't know
Welcome.
but we have a saying sometimes, what can go wrong will go wrong.
Also, Dr. Kwe, please, you are muted.
Huh?
You are muted, Dr. Kwe.
Okay. All right, so we are live now, right? Everyone is
Yes,
okay.
we are.
All right, so
Okay.
good afternoon. Good afternoon to all. It's
Good
2
afternoon.
p.m. It's 2 p.m. Eastern Time in the United States. My name is Benjamin Akwe. I take this opportunity to welcome our listeners and viewers all across the world, right? Before we introduce our guest, right, I just want to welcome all those who are watching and listening to us to the first edition of what we characterize as was the Sankofa African Affairs Series, which is organized by Bell and Associates Consulting, titled Africa, Past, Present, and Future, and the Role of the Constituency for Africa.
Good evening from Africa and all from Ghana. And my name is Jennifer Moffat, and I am the co-host for today's event. And I take opportunity to welcome all our viewers. It's 6 p.m. Ghana time, GMT, and I want to put on record that this event is hosted by Bella and Associates Consulting, which is a policy think tank and a consortium of independent consultants across Africa continent and from the diaspora, focused on African-centered approaches to addressing African-related issues. It's also co-partnered by Budget Ghana, and which is a civil society organization into transparency and accountability in public finance. So today's interview is titled Sankofa African Affairs. And in Africa, or in Ghana, specifically Ghana, when we talk about Sankofa, we are talking about things like having the opportunity to go into the past to do something, or things from the past is also allowed. So I'll take opportunity to quote from Dr. Bangura, who is one of our consultants at Bella and Associates. And he has a whole thesis statement on what Sankofa means in West Africa. So the Sankofa methodology originates deeply rooted in the Akan people, and it is originally developed by the Ashanti of Ghana and constitutes aphorisms of the Akan people of West Africa. When we translate the meaning of Sankofa, especially looking at the current context and all that is happening on the African continent, we can say that it means that it is not a taboo to go back to the source and fetch what you got, or what you have forgotten, or what you have left behind from the past. And its essence, Sankofa means that Africans should move forward into the future, and they need, if there is a need for them to go into the past and look at certain methodologies that worked for them, certain things that they did in the past that works for them, then they should go back to the past and then bring it into the future. So that is for Dr. Bangura, who wrote about Sankofa in 2011. So Dr. Akwe, over to you.
Yeah, so before we still proceed to actually introduce our honorable guest, I just want to give you a little snapshot of what is actually happening on the African continent, the crisis that we are currently experiencing. We've seen a climate crisis, flooding in eastern Libya, where there's an estimate of almost 4,000 people dead. We look at the magnitude of earthquake in Morocco recently, which also claimed the life of almost 2,900 people. and 5,500 people injured. We see situations, we have coup d'etats across the West African sub-region. We see what we have in Gabon, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and what happened in Sudan. So Africa is going through a lot of crisis. Then we're looking at debt and economic distress. African countries resorting to debt restructuring, resorting to IMF bailout, sections of the middle class falling back into poverty. We see inflation is also very, very high. Now, currently, we are seeing superpower competition on the continent. US, China, Russia fighting over what? Dominance in the region. So before we introduce our guest, like I said, we may make the argument that some of these crises that we are experiencing are natural in terms of what climate change. Others may also make the argument that these crises are self-inflicted or are a result of neo-colonial overtures, right? Though there may be some reasons to believe that some of these things are either self-inflicted, they are natural, or they are neo-colonial overtures. We can make the argument that it's going to be a mix of these things. So what we are going to do today is take a look back for the past 3 decades, right, with our guests to try to have a general view since the inception of democracy as far back as 1993 from Ghana, right, and try to reminisce, go back and see some of the issues that has impacted the African continent. We are going to look at somewhere from 1993 to 2008, a decade and a half, which is the past. Then we'll try to go back into from 2008 up to the current to look at some of the issues, right? We are going to have our guest who is going to help us to analyze some of these things. In our subsequent broadcast, we are going to deep dive deeply into some of these things. But for now, we just want our guest to give us a general overview of some of these things. So at this point, it is my pleasure to welcome our honorable guest, Mr. Melvin Foote. All right. So Mr. Foote, it's a pleasure to welcome you as our first guest to this maiden edition of Sankofa African series. Now,
so
before we proceed, before we proceed, we also, Bell & Associate also want to take the opportunity to actually congratulate Mr. Foote and the CFA for a wonderful and successful program that they organized during the course of the week, right? They organized a program in partnership with Nixon Peabody Law, right? Dubbed which is under the auspices of the 2023 Ronald H. Brown African Affairs Series titled Empowering the African Diaspora to Impact U.S. African Policy, with special guest of honor, Senior Ambassador Johnny Carson.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akwe. It is my great honor to be the one to introduce Honorable Foote here. And this is a brief introduction or a brief bio from the Black professionals in international affairs. So Mr. Foote has been appointed as member of the Black Professionals in African Affairs Advisory Body in 2003. And he has worked in Africa and on the African issues for more than 40 years. He is the founder and president of the Constituency for Africa, CFA, which has done a marvelous job on the continent. And there's so much, if you go on our social media handles, you can see videos of his interactions with most of our African presidents and a lot of other dignitaries. He has a 33-year-old Washington, D.C. based network of organization, which is made up of organization groups and individuals committed to the progress and empowerment of Africa and the African people worldwide. And then the CFA's mission is to build public and private support for Africa and to help shape US policies towards Africa. And that's the part that really interests me, because there's a lot of US policies that we would want to discuss today in relation to its effect or its impact on Africa. And he is a Peace Corps volunteer and a teacher in East Africa from 1981 to 1984, and he served as the country representative for Africa in Somalia, where he designed projects and managed relief and development projects and programs, that is in Somalia. So today, we welcome Mr. Foote to this interview. Dr. Akwe, please.
Yeah, so before we proceed, we just want a short address, welcome address from Mr. Foote before we proceed with our interview. So over to you, Mr. Foote.
You are muted, sir.
Okay, I think I'm good. Yes?
Good.
Yeah, you go.
Okay. First, I want to say it's a real pleasure joining you today. I always like to talk to my sisters and brothers on the continent. And I personally think that this platform, we have to use technology to do this. In the past, I would always have to get on an airplane to fly 10 hours to South Africa somewhere, to wait for 2 days to have the meeting. You spend a lot of money, you spend a lot of time, but now we can actually use this technology to our advantage. And I fully endorse the technology. We all got involved in using during the COVID pandemic because we couldn't meet with each other, we couldn't see each other, so we developed this technology. And I personally think the diaspora in Africa has to maximize the use of it in order to communicate with one another, and that's all. But I'm always interested in hearing what Africa has to say about this work. Our mission is to educate Americans about Africa, but it's important that we be in touch with Africa and African people on a regular basis. So I try to get to Africa at least 2 or 3 times a year. I was in Ghana last year, in fact, for a conference on cancer, breast cancer, and non-communicable diseases up in Kumasi. So it was really great to get to the Gold Coast. I was in Senegal earlier for the launch of the 2nd season of the African Basketball Association. So it was around sports and creative industries. And I was in Nigeria a couple of months ago for the Global African Diaspora Summit, GADS, which brought together diaspora representatives from about 60 countries to caucus with the Nigerian government and other governments, Jamaica and others, around unity and working together. So for me, it's very important to to talk with Africa. I'm an African American. That means that basically my ancestors originated from Africa, but came to America by way of the slave trade. And I did my DNA, and 40% of my DNA is Ivorian, 20% is Ghanaian, and 10% is Nigerian. I always tell my friend, anytime I start itching for money, that's my Nigerian comes out. But what we're trying to do is to make sure that, while we are, Africans in America, that's all we are. We're Africans born in America. That's it. We're still African. And so to try to get Africans to understand that we're all on one team, we need to be united on a lot of things. We need to be communicating on everything. If African people, the weakness of African people is division, fragmentation, and the fact that we don't see each other as brothers and sisters. And so the rest of the world is able to exploit that. And they want to make sure that African Americans, African Europeans, and other Africans don't see each other as brothers and sisters. It's important for them to see to see me different than you. And so what I try to do is to bridge the gap and to bring cooperation, promote cooperation between Africa and Africa's diaspora.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Foote. Is it okay to call you Mel? Because that is what most people in Washington, D.C. knows you to be, right?
Yeah, I don't know who Mr. Foote is. I'm Mel. Mel is my name.
Okay, so we'll stick with Mel. And also for the purpose of full disclosure, I have to disclose, disclose certain things. I actually met you in 2018 in Washington, D.C. during
really?
the same event you held over the weekend about us in 2018, right? But the title back then was Making the Case for a Fair, Effective, and Balanced U.S.-African Policy. That was in Washington, D.C. And also
now I remember. Now I remember.
Okay.
I remember now. I'm getting old, but you know, now I recall that. Yes.
Okay. Then I think in 2019 we had a conversation about the year of return, where we were trying to partner with the organization to work with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Ghana, so that we could organize various trade platform or investment platform in the United States. Then we go back to Ghana, right, to organize those things to bring investors into Ghana. So that was another way of getting to know Mr. Foote. Then lastly, I think in 2021, during the height of the COVID, where African countries were struggling with the COVID vaccines, I was able to reach out to you to see whether you could help the government of Ghana to be able to secure some vaccines. But we did all these things as a way of trying to network and show your commitment and your willingness to help African governments and African societies. So basically, I'm just trying to put this thing out over there for people to know that I already have a relationship with you for the past 5-6 years. Now, as we proceed, I just want you to know that we do a little bit of politics, right? Mostly you are in policy advocacy, but we try to go back. We try to go back into history as far back as 1994, right, during the Clinton time, which has actually cemented a relationship between the US and Africa, right? So we try to go back as far back as 1983, with democracy taking its shape in Africa. And we want our listeners to actually understand where we are coming from. So I'm going to get you a quote, which was made by Professor Jenkinson, who is a professor of political science at Duke University, right? So I have the quote over there. This quote is what we are going to premise our argument on from now till as we proceed with our series. So please, Jennifer, go ahead and read this quote for us. No, Jennifer, you are on mute. You are on mute.
Sorry about that. I didn't know I muted myself. So, this Bill Clinton's 1994 State of the Union address, which sounded like a quote from the political science literature on democratic peace theory. So I'm quoting, "Democracies don't attack each other," President Clinton declared. So ultimately, the best strategy to ensure our security and to build durable peace is to support the advance of democracy elsewhere. Clinton advisors coined the term enlargement, playing off the Cold War containment to refer to spread of global democracy and the US interests they served. So a major Clinton administration policy statement declared all of America's strategic interests, from promoting prosperity at home to checking global threats abroad before they threaten our territory, and are served by enlarging the community of democratic and free market nations, unquote. Dr. Akwe, over to you.
All right, so basically what you are trying to do is that we're trying to educate our listeners and the viewers around the world. We want to go back as far back as 1993, 1994, when democracy actually took roots in Africa, right? So this was a quote from Bill Clinton, right? So the question we want to ask, you have been doing a lot of work in Africa, right? Reflecting on the past 15 years, a decade and a half, right? What would you say has been the relationship, you as a Washington insider and somebody who has deep ties with Africa? What do you think that this quote has impacted people of African descent and people African continent? What do you think that this quote and policies implemented by the Clinton regime up to now, how have they impacted the people of Africa? And how has your policies, advocacy also impacted African societies?
Well, I think first of all, politicians are politicians. They're going to say whatever they need to say to get votes, whatever they need to say to win elections. They're going to say what they're going to say. I learned that a long time ago. And so I don't put a lot of sway in what a politician say. A politician will say anything to buttress their own argument. So having said that, Africa itself has always been a continent rich in natural resources. We all know that. Countries like Congo, Zimbabwe, all of these countries in Africa are actually are rich in mineral resources, and the rest of the world want those resources. That's the bottom line. They're going to say whatever they want to say to get access to those resources. They're going to tell you, oh yeah, we need to promote democracy. Oh yeah, we need to do this, we need to do that. When in fact, we don't even have democracy here. We claim that America is a big democracy, but if you talk to Black Americans, you talk to Hispanic Americans, you talk to other minorities here, we don't feel like this country is fair to us. So why would America be fair to Africa? You have to really ask that question. Why would China be fair to Africa? Why would Russia be fair to Africa? Why would Great Britain be fair to Africa? Everybody is trying to get access to the African natural resources. And that is the bottom line. And the U.S. Is behind some of the other parts of the world because we did not colonize Africa. We did not colonize it like the Germans and like the French and like the British and the Portuguese and the Spanish. So America is somewhat behind, we find ourselves behind. Most Americans are uneducated, undereducated, and miseducated about Africa. Thus my organization. We spend all of our time trying to change that. We spend all of our time trying to get Americans to understand. If you ask the average American on the street, if you walk down the street, especially if you go outside of Washington, and you go out and say, how many countries are in Africa? Very few people could even tell you how many countries in Africa. If you ask, name 3 African leaders, nobody could do that, If you ask the average person how many countries in Africa, they might say, oh, it's only one country. Africa is a country. Or they're going to tell you it's 1,000 countries. So if the American public do not understand or know anything, even about the geography, even about the history, how in the world can we have a political discussion? We talk about democracy because it sounds good. It sounds like, oh boy, everybody votes and everybody decides, but we don't even do that over here. We don't do it in Europe. We don't do it anywhere else in the world. It's always somebody's trying to get advantage of the others. So I don't want to lead African people to think that all of a sudden we got the answer for Africa. I personally think Africa has to come up with its own answers, and we should be supportive of that. It's not for us to tell Africa how they should organize the countries. We all know that 50-something African countries doesn't make a whole lot of sense in today's reality. We need to have, really, Africa need to be somewhat united, either in a federation or some other form that allow Africa to, to use this bulk of strength to make arguments to the world. When you go to the World Bank or you go to the United Nations, you really need to have a united front. But if Burundi is telling you, come to Burundi, Burundi is about as big as Washington. Gambia, how big is Gambia? So Africa got all these little fragmented countries that doesn't make any kind of sense. Now, I'm excited about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. I'm excited about it. Wamkele Mena is a good friend, and he's a really brilliant person. I'm optimistic about Africa, else I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. But I think that we have to be somewhat coherent and clear thinking about where we are in the world today. Now, right now, we're talking about all these coups d'etats that across Africa. And so we're shocked by it. And I'm hearing Americans talk about, oh, we shouldn't support Africa. We shouldn't support Niger because they had a coup. We shouldn't support Mali because they have a coup. And we don't even know anything about these countries. We don't know anything about the conditions that the people were living under. The reality was the French, although they're no longer the colonial power, they still exercise power over these countries. And they exercise power to get the uranium. They exercise power to get the gold. They exercise their power, as they always have, to get access to Africa's resources. So the U.S. is supporting the French position simply because France is seen as an ally to the United States. They vote with us in the United Nations and that kind of thing. So it's not about the African people. This is about French. And I'm lobbying my own government. I'm constantly criticizing them. Why are we hanging on to France? France is not a world power anymore. France doesn't have natural resources. Why is the United States, supporting France as opposed to developing a new strategy that works directly with the African people? And that's kind of where I try to push things.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, Jennifer, do you have a question? All right, so you've laid down a very comprehensive argument why Africa needs to work with African Americans in the diaspora. So let me ask, you've been working for CFA for the past 30 years. What are some of the impediments, right? You've been dealing with African states and African governments. What has been some of your frustrating, some of your challenges along the line for the past 30 years plus?
Well, the biggest issue I have is African leadership, by and large, is very selfish, if you will. When you look at Omar Bongo regime, and they had the coup d'etat, and now you find out like it was $1 billion, $2 billion of cash in the guy's basement, and so here we are. Africa needs a relationship with the world powers. They need a relationship with China. They need a relationship with Russia. They need a relationship with the European Union. They certainly need a relationship with the United States. How should they go about it? The way most of them go about it is they try to buy influence. They'll hire a white lobby firm on K Street, give them $3 million or something like that, and to lobby for them, and go and talk to Congress on their behalf, and nothing ever happens. The money is just wasted. They come to Washington, they have a big dinner for them and make them sound like big men, and $3 million of the people money is gone, as opposed to identifying people like myself who really do love Africa. I'm an African. I'm an African, and and we're fighting for Africa, but we can't get the resources that we need to do the work that we need to do. That is the biggest frustration. And I say, okay, they say the countries in Africa are poor. Well, if they're poor, why are you paying this guy $3 million? Why are you paying this guy $5 million, and so forth, if you're poor? But then when it comes down to a real strategy, the African countries are thinking that they need to hire a big white man to talk to the big white man. That's the argument that you hear, that we need to hire a white man to talk to the white man. And those of us who are here, come on, this is a joke. So if Africa was truly unified, we would understand that the left hand must work with the right hand. Africans on the ground in Africa, African governments can't do what I do in Washington. They don't know the strategy. They don't know they don't have access to the policy makers, and they can't make the arguments to support African positions. But I can, others like me can, but they increasingly will not use us, but they would turn to the white guy to make their arguments. And then they'll come to me and say, oh, my brother, my African brother. And okay, wow, but they'll let you starve and just hopefully that you'll work on your own because you're an African, you'll just work. And if something fall out, they applaud it, blah, 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 and go back to the white man. So this division is just something to behold. I mean, we talk about it all the time over here because we can see it as clear as a bell. And these guys who they hire, a lot of them are very useless people. We know them all, I could tell you whether somebody is good and can deliver or not deliver. I've been doing this for a long time. But, you'll turn around, they'll hire a firm and they'll give them all kinds of money to do what? To do nothing. So that is the biggest frustration that I have. I've been working hard to try to build relationships with the individual countries, through the embassies. We've been hosting a series of meetings with the African embassy to introduce policymakers, African Americans and diaspora, to these countries. And we would bring the most serious diaspora leaders together to meet with the ambassador to talk about the issues, talk about their priorities, and talk about their strategy. But you know, and it's, you know, you get a lot of you know, everybody is very happy about these meetings, but the follow up that we need is not there. Some of them I said, okay, why don't you bring a delegation from this diaspora from this meeting? You're excited about this meeting. Why don't you bring a delegation of 4 or 5 of us to go and visit your country, so that we can actually sit down on the ground in these countries, talk to people, meet with all kinds of people, have a better idea of what we're working with when we come back. But you'll find that the resources that you need are not there. So the strategy, what we find out is the strategy against what I do is to make sure the Black organizations over here don't have resources. This is what they spend day and night doing, making sure that organizations like mine don't have access to resources, because you only can do so much with your, you know, goodwill and your hard work and your own volunteer spirit. But the resources that you need, you know, it's not going to come from white companies. It's not going to come from Coca-Cola and Microsoft and Chevron. You know, and so how do organizations like mine that working in Washington, you know, we're here in Washington, D.C. I'm 1 mile from the White House. I'm about a mile from the U.S. Congress. But you know, when you look at the other ethnic groups, you look at the Israelis, for instance. The Israeli government, they have a group here called AIPAC, which is my counterpart, that is Israel, the Jewish counterpart here in Washington. Now they have, I'm telling you, they got a big office, all kinds of staff. They got a helicopter at their disposal. They got a conference facility. They're able to do all kinds of things because the Israeli government funds them to do it. You know, they see this in their strategic interest. But when it comes to Africa, we find African leaders come here begging for little money. You know, they want a little money for, you know, healthcare or something. You know, give us 5,000. You know, blah blah, as opposed to seriously coming and negotiating. That's the most frustrating aspect of what I do.
All right. So now, given some of these challenges that you've been facing over the years, you are still so much committed to the African continent. In your brief intro, you mentioned some of the things that you've done in the past. Can you elaborate it more so that our viewers and listeners will actually know the good work that you have done across the African continent? We want you to expatiate on that so that our listeners get to know what you've been doing, given the limited resource that you have.
Yeah, well, the big achievement here in Washington is, can you impact U.S. policy on Africa? Can you impact how Congress, you know, vote on issues? That is the big thing that people hear. That's what all the lobbyists try to do. That's what all the law firms try to do. Everybody who's working on Africa and Washington is trying to impact U.S. policy toward Africa. Well, in our case, we've had several major victories. The Africa Growth and Opportunity Act during the Clinton years, which is the U.S. trade program with Africa. Prior to AGOA. And prior to AGOA, U.S. policy toward Africa was dropping food out of an airplane for Biafra. That was the policy, you know, just drop them food from the airplane. You kill more people on the ground from them pallets hitting the ground than you do help them. Well, we actually got with the African Ambassador Corps. We took them around the country. We hosted a series of town hall meetings, about 35 of them, all across the United States, featuring African ambassadors, making the argument for trade, and not against aid, but, you know, we want aid too, but we want you know, the main relationship between the U.S. and Africa should be a trade relationship. Well, we got that passed by Congress, and it's now the law of the U.S. government. Now, the Africans have not taken advantage of it because the Africans are supposed to be preparing their companies in these countries. You know, it's a duty-free import of African products into the U.S. market. But in order for you to sell your products in the United States, you got to package them. You got to make sure that they're competitive for the U.S. market. If you're talking about clothing, it got to be, well cut, well organized, well designed. If you're talking about food products, you got to have it packaged correctly. So I think there's a lot of work. Now, AGOA is about to expire. It lasted for 25 years. It is about to expire. Here come the Africans to go, oh, we want AGOA extended. Well, for 25 years, you haven't done anything with it. How do we make an argument to extend it if you haven't done what you're supposed to do 25 years? So that's one of the things that we did. We also took up the issue of HIV/AIDS, and when AIDS was a major crisis around the world. And we got the Bush administration basically to launch a global response to HIV/AIDS in Africa, and that became PEPFAR. We came up with what we call the AIDS Marshall Plan, and we got President George Bush. We wanted him to commit $3 billion for AIDS relief in Africa. He gets to the microphone at the State of the Union and said $19 billion for AIDS in Africa. $19 billion. Wow, we were blown away. We were just pushing for $3 billion, But the main thing we wanted to do was to get the U.S. committed toward a global response to HIV/AIDS, and it exceeded our expectation. President Obama, when he came to office, of course, he was the first Black president in the United States. The Republicans, when Obama came to power, they really wrecked the economy intentionally. They made sure that the banks were crashing and the stock market was crashing. Everything was in bad shape. Welcome to the White House, Mr. Black man. So Obama sent one of his aides to see me and said, okay, look, my first couple of years in office, I got to spend my time getting the American economy back in place, to get Americans back to work and that sort of thing. But I want Africans to know that his father was a Kenyan. I want Africans to know that I care about Africa very much, but I can't do what George Bush did, his predecessor. Bush committed, like I said, 19 billion for AIDS. He also did 5 billion for the Millennium Challenge account. Here comes Obama with no money in the bank. So I wrote a paper for him. I wrote a concept paper, and I said, first thing, I would not spend my time chasing African dictators. Don't go chasing Mugabe and Biya and Bashir, and some of you guys are still in power. But spend your time with the young ones coming up, the next generation of leaders. Well, he was a young guy at the time. Wow, he loved that idea. And that became what we know now as the Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI. I also told him to do a White House conference on Africa. That won't cost a whole lot. And I was thinking that, we had also talked about like 4 or 5. Jerry Rawlings was one of the ones we wanted to lead this year. I think Mandela was still alive then. And, the first, they were going to do it at the end of the first term, but we had this oil spill in the Gulf, and it derailed, the agenda. So it went on it was held in the second term of the Obama administration. And they shifted it from a general discussion about Africa to one of trade and investment. It was unprecedented in terms of 40 African leaders came to Washington. And, it was a magical moment, to see all these African flags flying around here in Washington. But that was another thing that we have to take credit for. And there's a lot of other things. I got the White House once during the genocide in Rwanda, I got them to give us a plane and flew 40 of us to Rwanda in 1994 during the genocide to make an assessment of what was happening there and make some recommendations in terms of the U.S. response. So there's several different instances where we can say that, whether we get credit or not, it was our impetus that actually made a lot of things happen. And so with the Biden administration, we wrote a policy recommendation paper when he first came to office, and we submitted our recommendations for the Biden policy toward Africa. And I can say when they announced it right before the summit in December, we're happy campers. All this stuff about diaspora engagement, that came from us. All this discussion about small and medium-sized businesses came from us. There are many aspects of the Biden policy that we're very content with because we gave the ideals to the administration. And that's a major kind of thing. Never before in history had Black people have had access to U.S. policy like we do now. And when we think about who we are, when we look at who we are, we're African Americans, of course, those who came as descendants of slavery, but we're also African immigrants. There are Nigerians, Ghanaians, Ethiopians, and others who are here, who are descendants from their countries, but who are now part of the fabric of the African diaspora in the United States. So we try to be as inclusive as we can. We try to make sure the young people are included. Every time the Yali groups, the Yali program, every time they come to the U.S. for the Yali, I always meet a lot of them. And I'm kind of an icon among the Yali. They know who gave the idea to Obama. And but I think that it's a great idea. I've met maybe 10,000 of them since the program started, and I can say I haven't met one yet that I was not impressed with. So this speaks well of the future. These are young people who are clearly getting it, and if we can help them to, understand some things and to help build some strategies, I think they're going to bode well for Africa going forward.
Okay, before we proceed, I saw Jennifer shaking her head when it came to the issue of Yali. Jennifer, do you have something to say to that effect?
Yes. And that's because even though I have not benefited from Mandela Washington Fellowship, that is the US version of the Yali program, I am a beneficiary of Yali West Africa. So Ghana hosts the West Africa for Yali, and I was in cohort 14, so I can really resonate with what Melvin was saying here. So I was really happy to hear him say, I never knew that idea actually came from Constituency for Africa. So I'm really, really grateful to be connected in a way to this great man here.
Well, one of the things that happened here in Washington, everybody tries to take credit for everything. Let something good go down. Oh, I did it. I've taken a different episode. It's not like Yali is my idea. It's not my program. I just gave the idea to Obama. This is Obama's initiative. He was the president, not me. And in this work, if you want to get something done, you got to be ready to don't be the one who has to take the credit for everything. CFA is a catalytic organization. We try to make good things happen for Africa. That's it. And if the politician needs to take credit for it, c'est la vie. It's good. But Obama was asked about it one time, and his comment was, well, a lot of people give me good ideas, and if they're good ideas, I take them. In other words, he accepted the fact that because the administration was trying to say, oh, Obama came up with this. Well, come on, he's the president of the United States. He ain't got time to be sitting around thinking about everything. And so it's incumbent upon us, the diaspora, to be feeding ideals and suggestions that actually can benefit. I'm a former Peace Corps volunteer, and up until the point of Yali, Peace Corps was the greatest program ever from the U.S. government side. Now I think Yali is the greatest program ever from the U.S. side. And I don't even think we understand how important it is. One of the good things about Yali is the Senegalese was able to meet the Zimbabwean, and the Kenyan met the Nigerian, and the Swaziland, and women meet men. You see all the gathering, all the Muslim meet Christian, and these young people are digitally, they're able to communicate through Facebook and all the technology. So now they see themselves as broader than their own little country, and I personally think that that's the most profound thing that will come out of Yali, is that Africa meets Africa.
All right, so we have some few minutes to go. Let me pose this question to you. Now, for the past decade and a half, right, U.S. strategy in Africa has been based on what we call the 3Ds, right? Diplomacy, development, and defense, right? These three areas, right? Diplomacy being led by the State Department. Then you have what? Development being led by USAID, then defense being led by the State Department, the Department of Defense, right? Now, we can see that for the past decade and a half, there has been some crisis, right? We're talking about corruption. We're talking about coup d'etats. Recently, the president was actually at the UN, right? Just recently. I don't know whether we have time to put a quote out over there, something that he stated. Jennifer, do you have it ready? A quote for Melvin? All right. he was talking about a crisis with respect to democracy and corruption. And these 3 Ds, right? Have they been able to reach out to African Americans or a CFA to be able to partner with them, for them to be able to help address some of these challenges that we are facing in Africa, especially with democracy and the coup d'etat that are currently happening? What role do you think the CFA can play to mitigate some of these challenges? Because it seems like it's going to prolong for a long time. Because you are talking about we have the old guys, some of them are still over there. So you giving your history as a Washington insider and somebody with on the African continent, what role do you think that the CFA can play in order to help these institutions in terms of partner with them to resolve some of these crises, democracy and coup d'etats?
I mean, that's a great question, and that would take us 2 hours to answer. But I would say that we could help them a whole lot if they were open to it. Now, I do have access to the policy apparatus. They do. I was talking to the senior director for Africa National Security Council the other day, and he was making, this is at Howard University, he made the comment that he's in some of the meetings at the White House, and somebody would say, well, what does Mel think about this? You know, and wow, that for people who do what I do, that was some insightful to, what does Mel think about it? Well, for instance, I've been involved in monitoring several elections in Africa. I put a team together to monitor the election in Gabon. I think it was 2014 or 2010 or something like that. It was all Black team, including the former president, acting president of Liberia, Ruth Perry. And I had a black guy who was a former Supreme Court justice in Colorado. I had a 5-person team, and we went there, all Black people, and we had our conclusion. We thought the elections were not free and fair. There was all kinds of issues, but it was a good thing. We were well received by the people, But all of a sudden now they don't pushed away from engaging people like myself involved in the election process. So you go to Nigeria, you look at the team that monitored the election in Nigeria, mainly U.S. government types, National Defense, National Democratic Institute, And so to me, they go to Nigeria to monitor the election, but before they arrive, the final report has already been written. They already say what they wanted to say, depending on do they want to be friends with Nigeria or not. So in this case, we want to be friends with Nigeria because it's a rich, wealthy country with oil and so forth. So there's not a real clear commitment toward trying to help Africa to get past some of it, because they don't love Africa the same way I love Africa. Sure, you can't say only Black people love Africa. Everybody, a lot of people love Africa. But I can say that we see ourselves as engaged in the process, and we don't see ourselves as advancing without Africa advancing. If Africa does not get better, Black America will not get better. That's really where it is. So I think we have a long way to go. We have to continue to advocate for change, but it's not going to happen overnight. I think that this process is probably 100 years or more to go. We have about 100 years. I don't think I'm going to be around that long. So it's important for us to bring on the next generation and to encourage young people to take up this mantle, because the battle for Africa's resources is going to go on for a long time. And, it's going to go well beyond us. So let's don't think that we can just turn the switch and everything is going to be good. It's not going to be good. And I would just say that there's a lot of work. Again, Americans are uneducated about Africa. That's starting from that. So you will hear the White House is talking about, we're going to invest $50 billion in Africa coming out of the summit. Now you go tell the people in Kansas or people in Nebraska, they'll think that, no, you're wasting my money, because they don't have any understanding at all about Africa, So until I see a strong campaign to educate Americans about Africa, to encourage more young people to go into the Peace Corps and play programs like that, to expand Yali and programs like that, until I start seeing more of that, I can't be too confident of a positive change.
Yeah, that sounds very okay. But programs like this, where we are able to bring all kinds of people, will be able to educate Africans on the continent, those in the diaspora, so we can be able to do partnership to be able to bring this education. And I think that would be a best way to go. Instead of you traveling down miles and miles, we could have some of these live programs, try to educate people right? That there should be a strong partnership between the African American, the diaspora, and African, so as to be able to resolve some of these conflicts. But given your experience in Washington, D.C. and on the African continent, things like that, programs like this would go a long way to impact the continent going forward.
I agree, and anything I can do to help you in that regard, I can do. I can also bring other stakeholders together who can add voices to it. But I think it's a good idea. I'm all for it. It'd be great if we had the resources to really do this thing right. Like we need to have an annual think tank conference in Africa. You know, it could be as large as you want or as small as you want. A lot of times, this is not about having thousands. But if you can get 25 of the best thinkers on the continent to come together, and I could bring 25 from the US and Canada and some other places, maybe we can get some things done. I can tell you that even the Black folks who I work with all kinds of people who are, you know, some of them are out of the Pan-African movement. My best friend is Dr. Julius Garvey, and he is the son of Marcus Garvey.
Absolutely.
And we talk about every day we talk about this kind of stuff. But we know we need to bring these voices to play, and at least once a year we need to have some kind of forum in Africa that we can actually bring the diaspora to meet with African thinkers to try to come up with some strategies that can work. The biggest problem is people come up with pie in the sky ideals. I get it every day. People try to tell me they got the answer for Africa and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, you're looking at it saying, wait a minute, you know, and so we have to get serious about that. And I think a lot of what I try to do is connect the people together. I try to connect the dots. I try to bring people together. When I have a forum, we hosted a meeting last week, part of our conference in the Cuban embassy. And I was in Cuba in July, and you know, 40% of the population of Cuba is Black, you know. And when you see Black people in Guyana and Jamaica, places like that, you know, they're not like they different than me. The only difference is the slave ship stopped at one port or another port, you know. If the slave ship stopped at Jamaica port, there you were. If it stopped in the U.S. port, here I am. But we're the same people, right? So we got to really get serious about bridging the gap. There's a lot of people out there who are doing great work, who are doing, you know, are really thought leaders on a lot of this stuff, but they have to be able to bring them together in the same room. So for the meeting with Cuba and the meeting with Ambassador Carson, I handpicked people who I invited, you know, handpicked. And some of them were looking around and, wow, you know, like nobody could say, oh, well, I'm the only dynamic person in the room, because everybody in the room was dynamic. And I tell you, with Ambassador Carson, he was kind of shaking. He was excited on the one hand, but on the other hand, he was a little bit shaking on this. But I think he really enjoyed it because he's an African too, you know. And although he's a senior official in the White House and State Department, he's also very much an African. And so this is what I try to do, is put us all in the same room so we could start to create some kind of understanding about the way forward.
Thank you very much. On this note, we take this opportunity to thank you for coming on this program and sharing your thoughts and your opinions with us. We appreciate your time and effort, and we hope that next time when we call you, you'll be willing to come around so that we will have such educational debate and discussions.
Yeah, I will. If you can send me there a tape out of this, there's a tape, send it to me so I can share it broadly through my network. But I see what you're trying to do. And for me, I try to work with people who are working, you know. And if I see somebody got a good idea and trying to fine, I don't have to be the leader or nothing. I don't have to get the plaque. I don't have to be the chief. You know, Africans like to be the chief and be in charge. I don't have to be like that, you know. But I like to work with people who are working just to get this work done. Because not one individual, me, you, or any one individual can solve all of these problems.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you very much. All right. So we hope to see you another time. So for our viewers and listeners on various social platforms, we had opportunity to talk to Mr. Foote, and we hope to be back next 2 weeks on Thursday, October 5th, right, where we're going to have a discussion on what? Security, right? challenges of African security, past, present, and we are going to have one of our consultants coming all the way from Juba, right? So we hope to see you next week. Jennifer, you have the last word.
Thank you everyone for joining. I hope you really enjoyed today's session. I'll be here again next week, and this time around we'll be with my rotational host will be Dr. Benjamin Maka from the University of Juba. And our guest is going to be Honorable Lieutenant Todd Coker, and he's the former US ambassador to the Gambia. And that is going to be in 2 weeks on October 5th. And it's going to be 8 p.m. GMT and 4 p.m. US Eastern Time. So thank you all for joining, and we hope to have deeper discussion next week, and opportunity for listeners, especially those of you on Zoom, to be able to also ask questions. Thank you all, and have a good night here in Ghana. I think it's still afternoon in the US or wherever you are joining from. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, Jennifer, where's she a phone contact, right? You can take it and probably we'll discuss it later, right?
Phone contact, hold on, sir.
It was listening to. My name is Ora Ofori. I'm founder of African Dream, which is
Oral.
communication.
I have Oral's number. I know Oral.
Okay.
He's in the US embassy in US. Is in the Ghana embassy in the US.
Okay, so we can do that. I have to rush.
So there was a message. Let me read. I can't see the message. Okay, enlarge the screen and stop sharing.